All right, we're ready to start chapter 2, which is called 13 Colonies. We're going to be looking at how those colonies got established. We're looking primarily at the English colonies, which would eventually become the United States. So that's our interest here. We want to see how they were established, etc. All right, first of all, introduction. There are three types of colonial administration, three different ways in which colonies were administered or governed. And it depended on the commercial relationship of the colony with the mother country. The first type of colony is called a charter colony. A charter colony was a colony which was governed by a trade company. We've already read about that. We talked about that briefly. A trade company would be a company formed by a number of individuals coming together, forming a company, investing in the idea of starting a colony in the New World, hoping to gain wealth through that relationship. And so a charter colony was given a charter by the king. In other words, given permission officially to go and establish colonies in the New World. And so be governed by that company that oversaw the colony. And the charter, as I said, was authorized by the king. He signed his name on a charter saying that they were allowed to do that. They had official permission. Of the different types of colonies, this one usually enjoyed the most independence in their government. In other words, they were the furthest removed from the authority of the king in a sense because a company had governance over the colony. And oftentimes that company allowed the colony to run their own affairs. All right, so that's a charter colony. Any questions about a charter colony? The second type of colony is called a proprietary colony. A proprietary colony was one in which the proprietor, or the one who was running the colony, was appointed by the king to govern that colony. And then he might in turn appoint a governor to actually be there. But the king appoints someone here, you take care of this land, we own this land in the New World, you be in charge of that. And then however you want to be in charge, if you want to go there or appoint somebody else, that's up to you. So that's proprietary. The king allows someone to have oversight over an area. Any questions about proprietary? And so the person's called a proprietor. The third type of colony is called a royal colony. This kind of colony was controlled directly by the crown. So the governor of that colony was appointed directly by the king and his counselors. So this is the colony that the king had the most direct oversight. So three types of colonies: charter colony, proprietary colony, and royal colony. And you should be able to keep those three straight, and also to be able to tell me which one has the most freedom. All right, any questions? All right, next we want to look at how did they get settlers to come to the New World? How would you attract settlers? Well, there are different ways, different things that were used. First of all, you can imagine that the dreams of quick fortunes was an attraction. And so what would be known? Well, the Spanish got lots of wealth from what? Say it out. Gold and silver, right? So the thought was that there's gold and silver in South and Central America, there must be gold and silver in North America too. So, go settle in the New World in North America for England and you'll get rich on gold and silver. Like that. But what's the problem? Kayla? Well, it didn't bother the Spanish any. They just forced the Indians into slave labor and got food from them. So why didn't it work out for English coming to North America? That's true, and that happened at Jamestown, where they're looking for gold, they weren't planting, but that's not why this didn't work to attract settlers. Alex? Yeah, there was no gold and silver. It never materialized. All right, so they started looking for some other ways to make money in America, and that was through making a fortune through the growing of crops like tobacco, which was not known in Europe before America colonization, and also, oops, there's a picture of tobacco in case you've never seen it. That's what it looks like before it gets dried and rolled up, and then the way in which you should not see it. Rice was another product that they could grow lots of rice, especially in the most southern colonies, to sell. What was there lots of in America that they were getting short supply in England? Trees. So lumber. A lot of lumber came out of America. And one of the things associated with pine trees that they use for lots of things is pine tar. That's a picture of pine tar. Also, another plant that they were able to use was indigo. Anybody know what they use indigo for? Caleb? Dye. Yeah. What color would it be? Yeah, purple dye. Prior to this, in ancient history, they used a shellfish, a mollusk, to squeeze and to get drops out for dye. But now here's a plant they could use to make purple dye. And then the last source of money in the New World was furs from animals like beaver, and fox, and others. All right, so those are ways that you could make money in the New World without having the gold and silver. Now, one of the key factors in the New World is that there is abundant land. There's lots of land. In fact, they didn't even know how much land there was. Had no idea how far this continent went. Lots of land. And so when they first came to settle, they didn't really take advantage of that so much. The first settlers that came to like Jamestown and even to Plymouth tried to establish a colony in which they did not have private ownership. They tried to live communally, share and share alike. Everybody works, everybody gets the food. But unfortunately, what we found in Jamestown, as you know, is that everybody didn't work, and therefore there wasn't enough food. And the same thing happened in Plymouth. As they tried to live communally, they found it didn't work. That when they allowed people to own their own land and grow their own food, suddenly they worked harder and they grew a lot more food. So communal living did not work. Private enterprise did. And there was lots of land available. Now, beginning in 1614, Jamestown colonists were each given 3 acres of land. So that enabled them to work their own land and grow their own food. The Virginia Company, in order to attract settlers, offered what was called head rights. A head right was 50 acres of land, and it was given to anybody who paid for another colonist to come over. You would get 50 acres. If you came over, you got 50 acres. And if you were the ship captain that brought them over, you got 50 acres. Or the one who paid for them to come over. And the plantation owner for whom the new colonists would work would get 50 acres. So lots of land out there, and they're just giving it away like crazy to get people to come over and settle in this land. Now some would come over as an indentured servant, the word right there. And that would be a work contract. The arrangement would be that someone who was already there and owned land needed people to help work it, because you got 50 acres, you can't clear all that yourself, or even a large portion of it, and so you need help. So you pay for someone to come over to help you and to be your worker. And then at the end of usually 7 years, then he was given his freedom and he could his own land. So it was a way to get workers here that were greatly needed and to attract them with the fact that after 7 years they would be totally free and able to farm their own land. Okay, do you understand the idea of the indentured servant? I think you've probably heard that before. Any questions? Now, some interesting things about the indentured servants. So we think of servants as being somewhat maybe low in the socioeconomic world, but many indentured servants did very well for themselves. Well, first of all, outside of New England, nearly half of the people arriving in the colonies were indentured servants. So there's a lot of people that are in that category. Between 1750 and 1775, there were over 50,000 indentured servants in Pennsylvania alone. Examples of former indentured servants who improved their lives. Charles Thompson of Pennsylvania became the Secretary of the Continental Congress. He came over as an indentured servant. Matthew Thornton, a signer of the Declaration of Independence for the colony of New Hampshire, was an indentured servant. George Kesey immigrated to Virginia in the 1690s, received 50 acres after completing his service. His son Richard was later able to amass tracts totaling 3,000 acres in the Virginia Piedmont. So you could do quite well for yourself, even originating as a servant. All right, now let's talk about the aspect of religious freedom. One thing that attracted settlers was you could make money if you did the right things. Another one was attract settlers was that there was lots of land. You could get land to have your own farm. And the third thing that attracted settlers was religious freedom. Why was that necessary? Why was it? What was it that was driving people to America in order to gain religious freedom? What do you think, Michaela? Can you speak louder so everybody can hear?
The Church of England was an Anglican church, and it was a very controlling church that was causing basically the Anglican.
Yeah, and that was true all over Europe. Every place where there was an established church, and by that I mean a church that was tied to the government and the state, they were very intolerant of anybody else. And there were some religious groups that didn't think that the church ought to be a part of the government, and so they were not tolerated by anybody. So there were examples throughout continental Europe, especially where Roman Catholic troops were crushing Protestants throughout Europe, and so many of them wanted to flee that and just the religious wars in general to come to America. And then just in general, the religious intolerance in England as well, and from Protestants toward others. Protestants toward other Protestants sometimes. It was experienced by many, and so they came to America because they could be more free to pursue God as they desired. All right, any questions about religious freedom? So 3 things that attracted settlers. The first one was what, everybody? I didn't hear everybody. The first thing that attracted settlers was what? Getting rich. Second one was land, and the third was religious freedom. Okay, there you got it. You got the reason why people came. All right, let's look. Oh, there's the religious freedom. I forgot to put the information up there as we talked about it. You missed it. There it is. There it was. Now it's gone. All right. Next, we want to look at the land system. It was the single most important influence in the nature of the settlement of America. So what was it like to live on the land in America? First of all, we want to compare the change that came about as a result of moving from England to America. All right, so we're looking at the changes from England to America. First, in diet. The diet in England had been largely grain, which they call corn. They didn't mean by corn. They didn't mean what we call corn. All grains were called corn. So that grain was their big thing. But in America, they really did eat what we call corn, or maize, or Indian corn, as they called it originally. All right, so American diet was different, eating corn. And boy, I love this time of year when you can get fresh corn, sweet corn. Not the kind of corn they ate back then, though. Those are through a lot of hybrids and development. But I love the corn on the cob we get this time of year. In England, they were dependent on domestic cattle. They had a lot of cows. In America, it's hard to transport cows over. But one thing that was easy, in fact, Queen Isabella suggested to Columbus that he bring was pigs. And so pigs became a dominant part of the diet of those living in America. And of course, some of them got off into the woods and went wild, and so we had wild pigs coming into existence. All right, what do we mean by capital? We talk about capital, not the capital of the state or anything like that, but when we're talking about capital, anybody know what that means in economics? Capital is that which you use to purchase things, so what you use to invest. So it usually has to do with money, although it can refer to other things as well. Well, so in England, there was a relative abundance. Oh, here's the corn. I forgot to show you the picture. Not nice and yellow like we have today. Oh, and there's old Porky. In case you didn't know what a pig was. Now, in England, there was a relative abundance of capital. There was money for investment. If you wanted to start a business, you could find people to invest. But is there money in America? No, they don't use money that much. There's no money here. So that was the difference in the availability of capital. And so there's a lot more bartering that took place in America than in England. All right, what about labor? What's the availability of labor like in England? What would you suppose? Are there lots of workers available in England? Yeah, and not many jobs, so there's high unemployment. So relative abundance of workers in England, but in America, it's very scarce. That's why you paid to have an indentured servant come over, because you couldn't find workers to work for you, because everybody's working their own land. Land in England was very scarce. It's an island. There's only so much land there, and a lot of it's owned by a few of the nobles. So there wasn't much available to someone who wanted to start a farm. There wasn't any land there. But in America, it was very abundant. There's lots of land. All right, so those are the changes that took place as we think about the land system in America, changing from England to America, the differences that are there. And of course, because of these differences, and especially the abundance of land, agriculture became very big in America. Now, we next want to look at the sectional differences. As we think about the different colonies, we can separate them into three different sections of North America, the continent, and there were distinct differences between them. First of all, let's look at New England. New England, when people came over to New England, they didn't come as individuals so much, they came as groups. And so they purchased land in a group, most of the time a church congregation. So, and we'll get into the story later, that as people came over as a church for religious freedom, they would purchase land together and they would live together, start a town together as a group of people, and that if it was decided that that land wasn't big enough anymore and that they needed to move, the whole church would move. Not just a couple people, but everybody would move together. They saw themselves as being part of a group, congregation. Townships were designated to a congregation. So like I said, the congregation came over and they had this particular area that was their township. Now in their towns, they were required to have a village green, a church building, I should have said, not just a church, and a school. Now, what's a village green? Who can tell me what a village green is? How many of you have ever seen a village green? Have none of you ever been to Canfield? Who's never been to Canfield? And yet, you say you haven't seen a village green. There's one right there in the middle of Canfield. So what is a village green? Does that help you at all? Kind of like a park. In Canfield, you've got that big oval area that's covered in grass, which makes it green. Yeah. Well, that was required in all New England towns, to have a village green. Now, why? What was the village green used for? Why would they require a village green? It's a place where they could gather for different things, games, outdoor social activities. What else would it be used for? Why would it need to be green? Let's see, what is it that makes it green? Grass. What could grass be used for? What? Feeding livestock. Yeah, and especially sheep. So that you didn't have to try to take your sheep, way out in the wilderness somewhere. You could bring your sheep to graze in the village green. It was open to anybody. Anybody could bring your sheep in. And as you mentioned, it had other uses as well. All right, so it was required that they have. I have church here. I really should call it a meeting house because they didn't call it a church. Why didn't they call the building a church? Why didn't they call it a church? Did I know that, Michaela? Okay, Michaela, inform them. The church is not a building, it's the people. They're the congregation. The building was just a meeting house. And it was a meeting house not only for the church to come to, but also for other things, for government functions, for different get-togethers that they might need to have a place to meet. So that's the meeting house. So if you want to be correct, cross out church for a meeting house. And then thirdly, they were required to have a school. Required to have a school. And we'll talk later about why that was so important to them. But I'll give you a chance right now to speculate. Why do you think they required a school in every township? Kelly, give it a shot. Why? They wanted people in the New World to be educated so they could rule over the New World. Is that what you're saying? Anybody else have an idea? No? Okay, we'll find out later. Pique your interest maybe a little bit. All right. And as I said, people moved in groups. They came together in groups, and if they moved together in groups. Okay, let's look at the South. Any questions about New England before we go to the South? Any questions about the relationship of people to the land and how they came over in New England? Oh, by the way, the reason Canfield has a village green, anybody know why? There are a lot of people with sheep in Canfield? Yes? Didn't they? Only during the fair. Do you know, Joey?
I was going to say for the concerts.
No. Because Canfield was originally settled by people from New England, I think Connecticut specifically, and they wanted to always retain their heritage, their roots. And so the laws in Canfield require that if you build a building, it's got to conform to like a colonial style. You can't have signs way up high in the air. And they also constructed a village green to remind them of what it was like back in New England. And there are a few other communities throughout this part of Ohio as well. You drive along some back roads into some communities, you'll find other places like Mesopotamia. If you've ever been there, they have a village green because they were settled originally by New Englanders.
You've been Fulham, right?
Huh?
That place in the middle, that little park.
They had a little park?
Yeah, is that kind of like a village green?
No, it's not big enough. That might have been part of the original village green. I'm not sure. You have to look into that. Because, you know, that whole area changed from the roads and everything coming in. All right, any other questions about New England? All right, let's go to the South. In the South, they did not come as groups, they came as individuals. So there were individual grants of land. In the South, there was more freedom because they were there as individuals. There wasn't anybody saying, you have to have a village green, you have to. No, because they're living off by themselves. They're not even that close to their neighbors. In New England, they're all living together in a community. In the South, they came as an individual. They've got their 50 acres and plus, and they're not really connected to anybody necessarily. Because they were all a bunch of individuals with different grants of land, there were a lot of boundary disputes. So you can imagine, you know, Hayden has got his 50 acres, and Caleb's next door, he's got his 50 acres, and Hayden comes over and says, Caleb, your cows are over on my 50 acres. And Caleb says, no, that's part of mine. Oh yeah, where's the boundary line? Well, I think the boundary line runs from that tree to this rock. Oh no, it doesn't. It runs from that tree to, you know, so people were arguing about where the boundaries are. Next, there were small pieces of land that people got. I mean, 50 acres is not all that small, but they started out small. The percentage of the land cultivated was very small. So they didn't farm a huge part of their acreage because there were a lot of woods there that they had to clear out. So they only farmed a small area. And because they were so spread out, it was difficult to enforce laws. They kind of made up their own rules. It was difficult to enforce religion. They did what they wanted. A lot of people, there weren't any churches nearby for many of them. And education was done simply on the person's farm where they lived. There wasn't a requirement because people didn't live close enough to even have a school for the most part. Okay, any questions about the South? And looks like we're not hearing bells. Time is up. Sorry I kept you over. For tomorrow, there is no assignment. Just look over your notes so that you become acquainted with them and are ready for the test when it's time.